Hello, welcome to Infidelity True Stories. David looked around the small, dimly lit overhead waiting room. A few odd magazines, mostly women's magazines, were scattered on a low table next to the chair he was sitting in. The soft sounds of classical music poured from a speaker mounted on a shelf above his head. The melody was played at a volume loud enough to drown out the quiet murmur of voices that came to David's ears through the wall, but not so loud as to be annoying. Finally, the door opened and she walked in. Susan looked up at him and smiled weakly, uncertainly, as he turned his head and his gaze rose to her face. Immediately, however, David averted his eyes, not even attempting to speak to her. Although there were 6 chairs in the room, Susan sat down in the one next to him. "Thank you for coming, David," she said. "I hope Dr. Marks can help us move on." David didn't react to her words. Sitting silently in his chair, he only looked into her eyes, and she knew from his cold gaze that he didn't believe her. Just as she was about to start apologizing once again, the inner door to the next room opened, and a crying woman came out, wiping her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief. Lowering her head, the woman hurriedly crossed the room and disappeared behind the door of the reception room. A few moments later, a short, full-figured woman appeared from the same inner door and walked toward them. She had short hair and an expressionless face from which one could tell she wore little or no makeup. Her brown jumper showed off her sagging breasts and could not hide her bulging tummy. Her outdated green skirt hung down to her mid-calf, and her plain and unremarkable brown flat shoes did not compensate for her short stature but rather emphasized it. "Mr. and Mrs. Stillwell?" she asked, half assuringly, and then went straight on. "I'm Fran Marks. Thank you for coming in today. Please come into my office." Without waiting for a response, Dr. Marks turned on the spot and strode back to her professional home. Susan followed her, and David, rather reluctantly, got out of his chair and followed his wife. When everyone was seated, Dr. Marks, who had taken her place at the massive table, put her elbows on the surface, interlocked her fingers, and spoke. "So, I understand that the court ordered you to consult because Susan's lawyer requested it after David filed for divorce. Have I outlined the situation correctly?" she asked, shifting her gaze from one to the other. David and Susan nodded almost in sync, and then Susan stepped forward and blurted out, "I hope you can persuade David to give up the divorce and come home to me and the children." Dr. Marks nodded graciously and turned her head toward the husband. "And you, David? Why are you here today?" David looked up tiredly at the doctor sitting across from him. "I'm here because the judge said I had to be here." "Mm-hmm. I see." Dr. Marks tilted her head demurely. "Well, this is the first time we've met, and we'll be seeing each other here for another 11 sessions. Hopefully, we can resolve some of the issues that have arisen between you and allow you to move forward and live your lives in harmony." David said nothing to this. He just continued to look at the doctor with a completely blank stare, if not right through her. Fran Marks sighed quietly and continued, turning her attention back to the wife. "All right, Susan, why don't you tell me the purpose of your coming here?" "As I said," she readily entered the conversation, "I want David to stop this stupid divorce and come home. I do not want a divorce. His parents, my parents, our children, and our friends all agree that he should stop this stupid divorce and come back to his family, back to our home." "David," the counselor turned to the husband, "it seems that literally everyone who knows you believes that you should not divorce your wife. Tell me, what made you file for divorce?" "She said she didn't love me anymore, and I can't be married to a woman who doesn't love me," he said softly but firmly. Susan snorted loudly from her seat. "That's not true. I never said I didn't love him. In fact, I told him many times that I love him." "David, if Susan says she still loves you, why don't you believe her?" the doctor asked. David glanced at Susan with visible disgust and then turned to the doctor. "Actions speak louder than words," he said briefly. "But I didn't do anything." Susan was on the verge of tears. "Bye," David said, even more succinctly, narrowing his eyes. Fran raised her eyebrows in bewilderment. "I need you to explain this to me, David." The man raised his left wrist closer to his face and looked at his Apple Watch. With the index finger of his right hand, he tapped it a few times expressively and then spoke. It was 5 weeks ago, Friday night. I came home from work and he jerked his chin toward his wife, was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of wine waiting for me. It took me about 20 seconds to realize something was wrong. She said we needed to talk and asked me to sit at the table. I splashed myself a small drink and sat down across from her. She then informed me that she had already agreed to a date with another man and was going out with him the next night. Not only that, she also said that if Saturday's date went well and she liked everything about it, she might not come home until mid-Sunday. So, Dr. Marks, that was the news waiting for me at home on Friday night. Okay, I may not be the sharpest knife in the world, but even I could figure out what it meant. In that moment, I realized that if my wife was planning to spend the night with another man, it meant she no longer loved me. Susan whined again. But I didn't do anything. I didn't go on a date and I didn't sleep with anyone. And you left me and filed for divorce even though I did nothing. How many times do I have to say it? Is that true, David? The counselor intervened. Susan says she didn't go on the date and she didn't cheat on you. If that's true, why did you file for divorce? Intent, David said laconically with a thumbs up, offering only one word. Dr. Marks looked puzzled. Intent? David nodded. Exactly. Intention. She intended to sleep with some bloke and expected me to let her. After I packed up and left, she now claims she canceled the date and had been trying to find me all weekend. Do you have any reason to believe that's not true? Dr. Marks raised her eyebrows. I don't know, and it doesn't matter. All I know is that she definitely intended to sleep with some guy because I wasn't enough for her anymore. I never said that, Susan shrieked, and you didn't have to say it verbally. Your intention screamed it right in my face. Humiliating me, David parried. Dr. Marks tried to end the altercation and regain control. David, I understand why Susan's offer upset you, but she really didn't go through with it. When she saw that you didn't approve, she turned down the date. Certainly, your wife deserves credit for that. David pressed his lips together and shook his head. Seems to me that's like saying I deserve credit for not robbing the bank next door. He paused meaningfully, but it was noticeable that Dr. Marks was still confused. So David developed his point. Look, if I planned the robbery, prepared the getaway car, bought the mask, wrote an ultimatum note to the teller, and gave it to her, then I suppose that shows my clear intention to rob the bank. Then, after reading the note, the teller simply tells me no, and I run out of there. But no matter how I look at it, I'm still guilty of attempted bank robbery. Dr. Marks leaned back in her chair, and her frowning face reflected understanding. She turned to Susan and then looked at David again. Shaking her head slowly, the counselor spoke. I've been doing this for 17 years and have heard similar arguments many times. Until now, each time I have tried to defend a spouse who has backed away from their plans to cheat because in the end, they remained faithful to the marriage. Now, I'm struggling to find flaws in your reasoning, David. I'm not a lawyer, but I know that intent to rob a bank is a criminal offense in itself, even if you didn't get a cent of the bank's money. David nodded, pleased that she now understood the reason he filed for divorce. Well, what's going on? A worried Susan whispered, shifting her anxious gaze from her husband to the doctor. What does a bank robbery have to do with our problem? Fran raised her hand, addressing David. Please explain this to her. Susan, you'd taken the time to get to know your new mate better. You'd probably had lunch together a few times, maybe more than a few. You developed an interest in him that eventually turned into a sexual interest. That interest prompted you to agree to go on a date with him. When you agreed to the date, you were well aware of what his future intentions were. You're a big girl, and you know what's what, don't you? You were so sure of your friend's intentions that you felt it necessary to tell me about the upcoming date, as well as the fact that you would probably spend the night with him. By doing so, you once again confirmed your intention to follow his plans. In other words, you confirmed your intention to sleep with another man. The fact that you canceled the date after I objected doesn't change your previous intentions. I believe that if you loved me the way I love you, there is no way you would have agreed to a date with another man. But alas, you agreed to go on this date, which means you can't love me the way I love you. Loved you. I'm sorry, Susan, but I can't be married to someone who doesn't love me enough to stay away from men with similar intentions. Susan lowered her head and sobbed as David rose from his seat. Dr. Marks stood up too and extended her hand to him. "Thank you for coming today. I will let the judge know that there is no need for additional sessions for you." She then turned to the still sobbing Susan and put her hand on her shoulder. "I guess I'll have to spend a little more time with your wife, though.